So, let's talk about one of the most brilliant, but also one of the most controversial and, yeah, flawed figures in modern tech. Travis Kalanick, he's the guy who put Uber on the map and then almost drove the whole thing right off a cliff. This one quote, caught on a driver's dashcam of all places, it tells you almost everything you need to know. It just perfectly captures that brash, confrontational style that, on one hand, built a global empire, and on the other, planted the seeds for his own downfall. But like a lot of these stories, it all started with a pretty simple, universal frustration. Our story kicks off in San Francisco with a problem that pretty much everyone hated. Okay, so picture it. Kalanick, stuck somewhere, probably fuming, can't get a cab to save his life. And the idea that sparks in his head is just, it's so elegant. What if you could just summon a car with one tap on your phone, right? No dispatchers, no waving your arm off, just a seamless connection. It was a billion-dollar solution to an everyday headache.
Now, at first, UberCab was this niche, kind of luxury thing for the Silicon Valley elites. But Kalanick's ambition was way, way bigger. The real game changer, the real disruption, was UberX. This was the masterstroke, turning regular people with their own cars into a massive, on-demand taxi army. And that's when the world really started to change.
And with that change came this new philosophy, one that would define Uber for years. And it was simple: winning, no matter what it took. This was the start of their aggressive, rule-breaking, global takeover. Kalanick's strategy was basically straight out of a military playbook. I mean, he literally set up war rooms to plot these surge launches in new cities. The whole idea was to just overwhelm the local taxis and regulators before they even knew what hit them. And those cease and desist letters from cities, they weren't obstacles, they were like trophies. For Kalanick's Uber, any resistance meant they were doing something right. It meant they were winning. And honestly, you can't argue with the results, at least not on paper. In just 5 years, the company's valuation just skyrocketed. We're talking from $60 million to an almost unbelievable $68 billion. The whole win-at-all-costs thing, it was paying off big time. And Kalanick himself, he became the poster child for this new kind of founder. You know, the type brash, a little profane, with that always be hustling vibe. And in Silicon Valley, he wasn't just tolerated. For a while there, he was celebrated. He was the model for how to be a disruptive CEO. But that hustle culture, well, it had a really dark side. As Uber scaled at this just dizzying pace, the very culture that made it grow so fast began to show some deep, really dangerous cracks. Okay, this is where things get genuinely wild. Let me introduce you to something called Greyball. See, this wasn't just about bending the rules anymore. This was a deliberate, systematic program to deceive the authorities. Uber built a secret tool that could figure out if a user was a regulator and then show them a fake version of the app, like with ghost cars driving around, all to help their drivers avoid getting caught in stings. We're talking about deception literally coded into the software. And Greyball, that was just one symptom of a much deeper rot. That obsession with growth had pretty much poisoned everything. The internal culture was famously cutthroat. We're talking about employees using burner phones to make sure they didn't leave a digital trail for law enforcement. Meanwhile, drivers are complaining about pay cuts, and their own CEO gets caught on camera telling one of them it's basically his own fault. Empathy had just left the building. So all these internal problems were just festering under the surface. But it would take one person telling her story to make it all impossible for the world and for Uber's own board to ignore any longer. On February 19, 2017, a software engineer named Susan Fowler published a blog post, and its title, well, it was a quiet, devastating understatement for the absolute firestorm it was about to ignite. Fowler's post went viral, and for very good reason. It just laid bare this toxic, male-dominated culture where complaints about sexual harassment were systematically ignored by HR, a place where retaliation against anyone who spoke up was just normal. This wasn't a few bad apples problem. She was describing a completely broken, systemic failure. And that post? It opened the floodgates. Suddenly, the company was under siege from all sides. You have the internal crisis over its toxic culture. You have a massive lawsuit from Waymo, that's Google's self-driving car company, alleging that Uber stole their trade secrets. And then you have global regulators launching probes into everything from Greyball to their tax practices. It was an absolute onslaught. So the very traits that built Uber were now threatening to tear it down. And the same investors who had cheered Kalanick's aggression now saw him as the company's single biggest liability. And the downfall, when it came, was fast. First, the public backlash just exploded. Then, behind the scenes, a powerful group of Uber's biggest investors formed a coalition. They went to Kalanick with an ultimatum: step down, or they would go public with their demands and probably sink the whole company. He tried to fight it, but it was over. Travis Kalanick resigned as CEO of the company he built from nothing.
And here's the ultimate irony, right? After winning every single fight against taxi commissions, city governments, and old-school industries all over the world, Kalanick was finally outmaneuvered, not by some external enemy, but by the very people who had funded his war in the first place.
So after all that, what are we left with? Well, Uber survived. In fact, it's thrived. But its founder was permanently recast, not as a hero, but as a cautionary tale. His legacy is really two-sided, isn't it? On one hand, he's the disruptor. He absolutely changed how we all move through cities. He proved a crazy, radical idea could work on a massive global scale. But on the other hand, he's the cautionary tale. The proof that company culture isn't some optional extra. That the whole move fast and break things mantra can, in the end, break you. And that winning at all costs, well, it always comes with a bill. Which kind of leaves us with this final really tough question. We all use apps and services that were born from this exact kind of aggressive disruption. So when a company genuinely changes the world, maybe even for the better in some ways, does that excuse how it was built? It's something to think about the next time you push a button and get a ride.